Afghan officials say a NATO airstrike on 2 fuel tankers hijacked by the Taliban has killed up to 90 people, dozens of them civilians. The strike took place in a small village in Kunduz province at 2:30 in the morning. Villagers have told Al Jazeera most of the dead were families rushing to collect free fuel. Andrew Hopkins reports.
The charred remains of a fuel tanker, the targets of a US-led airstrike. This attack in Afghanistan's Kunduz province was supposed to hit Taliban fighters. International forces claimed they had good intelligence that they were present.
2 truck vehicles were stolen by the Taliban, and they were identified later that night around 01:30, and an airstrike occurred around 01:48 on those 2 fuel trucks along the Kunduz River. Again, based on the information we had, insurgents were positively identified.
But it could yet turn out to be one of their most expensive mistakes. The Afghans tell a different story. The Taliban has admitted to Al Jazeera it stole the trucks, but left one behind when it got stuck in the mud. This eyewitness tells what happened next.
People were working in the melon fields, and a number of people came together to the tanker to take fuel. And then we heard planes above and the bombs dropped. In this incident, lots of people have died and have been injured. Around 30 to 50 people were killed, I think.
As family members grieve outside this hospital, residents are demanding answers. And the boss of NATO has promised that he'll find them.
The Afghan people should know that we are deeply committed to protecting them and that we will fully and immediately investigate this incident.
It's an outcome that keeps repeating itself in Afghanistan. Coalition forces drop bombs on suspected Taliban targets. Civilians are killed or badly wounded. And it only underscores America's complicated decision of whether it should stay or go in a war that has gone on for 8 years. Andrew Hopkins, Al Jazeera.
Well, the Afghan MP who represents Kunduz province has been speaking to Al Jazeera about the incident. Here's what he had to say.
There is not understanding among the Afghan army and the NATO forces, and the report in the reports which from the sources they are receiving, it's not a true report. So that's why it is happening. It's not only in Kunduz, it's happening all over Afghanistan. And I think if they do not avoid the airstrikes in Afghanistan during the fight, there would be big resistance from the people of the innocent of Afghanistan against the presence of the foreign forces in Afghanistan.
Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Gordon Brown has been defending his handling of the war in Afghanistan. He's under increasing pressure to justify the military casualties to voters. From London, Tim Friend reports.
Just a day after the resignation of a ministerial aide over government strategy, Mr Brown made his case for Britain's presence in Afghanistan.
A safer Afghanistan means a safer Britain. It is on this basis that I made clear in the spring, as did President Obama, that preventing terrorism coming to the streets of Britain, America and other countries depends on strengthening the authorities in both Pakistan and Afghanistan to defeat Al-Qaeda and also the Pakistan and Afghan Taliban.
He's a Prime Minister under pressure over a foreign conflict. Like his predecessor, Tony Blair, whose popularity plunged over war in Iraq, Mr Brown is facing similar criticism on Afghanistan. He gave this answer to demands for a clear exit strategy.
The answer is that we will have succeeded when our troops are coming home because the Afghans are doing the job themselves. From that day on, we will be able to focus our efforts on supporting the elected government on security and on development and on human rights.
Mr Brown visited British troops last week to boost morale, but senior army figures say they need more and better equipment. Mr Brown said that it was on its way, but combined with an increasing number of deaths and growing criticism in the press, public opinion at home is proving hard to shift. Here on the streets of London, you'll find strong public support for British soldiers fighting in Afghanistan. But there's also growing disillusionment that their presence there is helping to make the streets here safer. The latest push by British troops in Afghanistan was described as a success by Mr Brown, but many voters now see it as an unwinnable war.
I don't think you're ever going to win a war against terrorism. Never.
Yeah, I'd agree as well, yeah.
You cannot pull out, you cannot stay. I don't know, it's like no situation, no win situation. If you pull out, it's lost. If you stay there, it's lost.
As more soldiers killed in Afghanistan are returned to Britain, the latest polling is not encouraging for the government.
Perhaps the most troubling thing for the government is that people are not convinced of the threat. Almost 2/3 of people in our most recent polling said that they believe that the troops should be withdrawn from Afghanistan as quickly as possible. It looks as if the political message just isn't getting through.
Thank you very much.
Despite the criticism, Mr. Brown made it clear in his speech that he believes the mission is justified, vital, realistic. Tim Friend, Al Jazeera.
Oh, with me now to talk more about this story is the political commentator Anthony Howard. Anthony, a safer Afghanistan means a safer Britain. This was really a direct appeal, wasn't it, to the British public to support Mr. Brown's Afghan policy, but hasn't he already lost that support anyway?
I think it's a very difficult case to make. I think the Prime Minister made it with as much firmness and robustness as he could. But I think people just don't accept that a safer Afghanistan means a safer Britain. That I think that may have washed at the very beginning, but now people are saying the body bag's coming back. It's rather like America and Vietnam, you know. They're saying, well, it's not working. And these rather bogus elections that have taken place haven't helped either.
Why hasn't he been able to make the case? Is it the problem that the majority of attacks on British soil actually have their roots in Pakistan as opposed to Afghanistan, and the public simply don't see a link?
I think there is that. Yeah, I think they see themselves that maybe this is an act of provocation that we're engaged in Afghanistan. Maybe far than making terrorism less likely, it may make it more likely, because they will be sort of enraged by what British troops are doing in Afghanistan.
Part of the problem also is he's inherited his policy effectively, hasn't he, from Tony Blair's government. It may well have been a war that he particularly wouldn't have wanted to get into, but he's stuck there now, and he has to follow the American line, doesn't he? I
think he does, and of course other things haven't helped, like yesterday the resignation of the Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Secretary of State for Defence, Mr. Eric Joyce, making the case in a letter to the Prime Minister of why the policy is wrong. So quite a lot has conspired against him, and I think that the increase in those body bags coming back is beginning to have the same effect in the United Kingdom as when it happened with Vietnam in the United States.
Clearly the British public care about the body bags that are coming back with British soldiers. Do they care about the civilians in Afghanistan? It was terrible timing to have this speech, isn't it, on the day that those NATO airstrikes may have killed more civilians in Afghanistan, in Kunduz, as we were seeing a little earlier in the programme. Is that something that is on the minds of the British people at all?
I think it's not at the top of their minds. I think at the top of their minds is the reflection that, you know, all sorts of people have tried to win wars in Afghanistan, restore stability to Afghanistan. It has never worked, whether it was the Russians much more recently or when we tried in the 19th century. And this is a very odd country, you know, made up of tribal associates and the rest of it, and it's not a single unity. And I think that the general feeling is growing in this country, I wouldn't say yet, it's majority feeling, that somehow the game isn't worth the candle.
There will, of course, be an election next year. If the opposition Conservative Party does win, which seems likely at the moment, are we going to see a dramatic change to British policy in Afghanistan?
Well, I think one of the strengths of the government's position is that up to now the Conservative Party has been a bilateral approach, and there hasn't been any great disagreement with the official opposition. My guess is, and it's no more than a guess, that were the Conservatives to come to office, they'd be very tempted to set some kind of timetable for exit, as indeed we had in Iraq, and that they might want to go down that road, but they won't want to imperil their relations with the White House, and they'll always have to consider whether that kind of action would commend itself to the American administration.
Yes, indeed, always at the root of British foreign policy. Anthony Howard, must leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts.